In that also document from National Alliance, step 2 discuss or recommends partnering with vendors to determine how to best drive appropriate adoption and utilization of these biosimilars. And that will include having discussions, as I mentioned, with your PBM and your account executive. You also want to understand what's coming in the pipeline, what's being approved, what has been approved, and what's going to be approved, and even start planning for the future, like the next year of as you're designing your plan and what you're, as an employer, planning on covering at full cost versus out of pocket for the members. And I think these discussions, you know, as mentioned in previously, are very important to provide this better understanding, and is definitely a good action item. Within the employer, the benefit team usually start these conversations. They're depending on how the organization have their organization structured. Either the HR person would be having these discussions with the PBM or the health plan. In some organizations, it's the total reward team. In other organization, it is purely a benefit, health and welfare. And then within these organizations, some employers do have in-house medical advisors and pharmacy advisors, and in other organizations they utilize the same services as a consulting. So they have a corporate medical director, a consulting health service provider that has a PharmD training and background, and those are typically the folks that start and engage the PBMs and the health plans in these discussions. The key questions for those team members within the organization that they would initiate the conversation with is, first, what is currently covered under the plan, what's available currently, and what is already FDA approved, and if they're not covered, why they're not covered. And these conversations sometimes get very difficult and challenging depending on the PBM or the other side, the vendor, the health plan. The main challenge that I've seen is it requires a lot of back and forth, and it's a lot of time consuming, because every person have to do their research and do their homework before having these discussions. But also there's the old way of doing things. You know, there's typically a huge focus on rebate guarantees, and anytime significant changes are made to a plan, these rebate guarantees are affected. And for a lot of organizations, they still heavily depend on those rebate guarantees coming back as funding for the company, and not understanding the whole picture of how these rebates are coming back to the employer and how much money they're potentially losing, in addition to the complete lack of transparency throughout that process. Many organizations can negotiate 100% pass-through, but there's still some fees that are considered either administrative fees or other type of fees that are, you know, not typically disclosed. And that is one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge is that for organizations or companies that bargain their benefits, making changes sometimes require a lot of communication back to the member. Sometimes you have to renegotiate it with the wage worker or bargain units for employers, and that also may represent some challenge throughout the process. But from my experience, a lot of time adding more medications and explaining the benefits of having more options and potentially a cost reduction is well received and makes that conversation goes a little bit smoother. With step 3 of the document, there is a recommendation to review specialty pharmacy benefit design to ensure that it supports appropriate use and access. This includes discussing how biosimilars are included in the plan, and are they considered at parity or considered preferred? Are they tiered? If the plan is a tiered plan design, where does the biosimilars fall into that? Also, if there's any restrictions or exclusion criteria, and certain requiring for prior authorization and step therapy, and how that affects the utilization of biosimilars is definitely important to understand and talk about it. And also, in some plans, they offer incentives for using a reduced cost medication, like reduced out-of-pocket cost, or even money back to the to the members covered under the plan. So there's a lot that can be done, and there's also other, potential creative ways to promote the utilization of a lower cost medication without obviously affecting the clinical outcome or the quality of care, which is what we're trying to achieve here.